It is 1953. A man sits alone in Philadelphia reading the morning paper. He is 64 years old. His name is James Mortimer Skinner, and 14 years ago, he walked away from the company he built into the largest radio manufacturer on Earth. He created the Philco name. He hired the engineers. He bullied the bankers. He undersold every competitor in America until they called him the wild man of the radio industry. At his peak, 1 out of every 3 radios sold in the United States carried his brand. 30 million radios, more than any company had ever built. He made the sound of voices travel through walls, through cities, through the vast darkness of the American night. And now he sits in a Philadelphia sitting room, forgotten by the industry he dominated, erased from the history books that celebrate his rivals. David Sarnoff of RCA will become a legend. Eugene McDonald of Zenith will be remembered. Powell Crosley will have his name on stadiums and museums. But James M. Skinner, the man who beat them all for a decade straight, will die this year without a single biography written, without induction into any Hall of Fame, without acknowledgement that he ever existed. The company he built will stumble through the next 8 years and then sell itself to Ford Motor Company for spare parts. The factories he constructed in Philadelphia's Kensington district will be demolished, bulldozed, erased from the map until nothing remains but a vacant lot where grass grows through cracked concrete. He taught America to listen. Was this the price of victory or the cost of being forgotten? Did your family have a Philco growing up? Maybe a cathedral radio in the corner of the living room, or one of those Predicta televisions that look like nothing else on the block. I'd love to hear which model or what you remember about it. Share it in the comments. Now, let's begin. The story of Philco begins not with radios, but with failure. In the spring of 1892, a group of Philadelphia businessmen gathered $10,000 to manufacture carbon arc lamps. They called their venture the Spencer Company, after Thomas Spencer, one of the founders. That same year, they renamed it Helios Electric Company, paying a German firm for the right to use their patents and processes. The American Helios limped along from the beginning. Carbon arc technology was already fading, replaced by incandescent bulbs that glowed steadier and cost less to operate. By 1893, the company had shut down temporarily due to lack of business. By 1895, they were advertising that more Helios lamps were in use than all other makes combined, a claim that almost certainly included the production of the German parent company. They were padding their numbers with someone else's success. The lamp business slowly strangled itself through the last decade of the 19th century, teetering toward bankruptcy, unable to compete against the flood of new electrical technologies pouring out of laboratories across America and Europe. Then, in 1906, something shifted. The company entered the electric storage battery business under a new name, Philadelphia Storage Battery Company. Philco historians consider July 25, 1906, as the date when Philco truly began. The idea was simple: supply batteries to electric automobiles, trucks, and mine locomotives. Expanded business led to the purchase of a factory site at Emerald and Tioga Streets in 1907. Frank Marr continued as president after the name change, serving simultaneously as sales and advertising manager. Edward Davis held the offices of secretary and treasurer. But competition was brutal. Philadelphia's crosstown rival, the Electric Storage Battery Company, makers of Exide and Willard batteries, already dominated the lucrative original equipment market. Philadelphia Storage Battery had to settle for aftermarket sales, picking up the scraps left behind by its larger competitor. Nevertheless, the switch to battery manufacturing would prove to be a wise decision. Into this struggling enterprise walked a 22-year-old chemist named James Mortimer Skinner. 2 weeks before receiving his Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from the University of Pennsylvania in 1911, he accepted a $75 per month job with the Philadelphia Storage Battery Company. He had been a second-string lightweight on Penn's boxing team. When the school's Priestley Club found itself in financial difficulties, Skinner served ice cream and cake at meetings to raise needed funds. He showed his keen sense for business early. Within 8 years at the battery company, he had risen to vice president and general manager, answering only to company president Edward Davis. Davis gave him free rein to advertise and promote the company, which Skinner did with gusto and panache. His 1919 advertising campaign helped make more people, aware of the company and its batteries, greatly increasing sales. That same year, he introduced a new trademark, Philco. The name was born in a company contest, won by engineer Donald T. McGregor. It would become one of the most recognized brand names in American history. Frank Marr died in 1916, and Edward Davis took over as president. One of Davis's first moves was to initiate an ingenious stock plan. Stock would be sold to executives, with the understanding that it could not be sold to anyone outside the company, that the firm could buy it back at any time for $110 per share, and that stock would revert to the company upon the death of the holder. Davis's theory was that Philadelphia Storage Battery should constantly refresh its management with new young blood. Stock was also issued to key men and officers as bonuses. This plan made all of the company's executives pull together toward the common goal of profits. Everyone had skin in the game. The company had sales of over $1 million for the first time in 1917. They supplied the Navy with auxiliary electric systems for battleships during the First World War. In 1918, Walter E. Holland joined as chief engineer. He had spent 10 years working with Thomas Edison to develop an alkaline storage battery. Now he brought his expertise to Philadelphia Storage Battery. The pieces were falling into place. A shrewd president, a hungry young manager, a technical genius in the engineering department, and a product that America was beginning to need. Radio changed everything. In the early 1920s, broadcasting exploded across America. Families gathered around receivers to hear voices crackling through the ether, concerts materializing from nowhere, news arriving in real time from distant cities. But early radios were powered by batteries, expensive things that needed frequent charging and leaked corrosive acid that ruined furniture and carpets. In August 1925, Philadelphia Storage Battery introduced its socket power battery eliminator, a rectifier unit that enabled users to operate radios from standard light sockets. No more leaking batteries, no more constant recharging. Just plug into the wall and listen. 400,000 units sold in 1926, 500,000 in 1927. Over 1 million socket powers were shipped before the technology became obsolete. Sales reached nearly $13 million in 1926, climbing above $15 million in 1927. Philco had found its moment. James Skinner understood something that his competitors did not fully grasp. Radio was not a luxury for the wealthy. Radio was a utility that every American family deserved. The challenge was making it affordable. Other manufacturers were building handcrafted sets for wealthy customers. The Baby Grand radio, for instance, was priced at $49.50 without tubes in 1929, roughly $1,000 in modern money. With tubes, it would wipe out a worker's entire weekly salary. Skinner believed those prices could be scaled down by incorporating assembly line techniques, then being used only by the automobile industry. He looked at Henry Ford's River Rouge plant and saw not cars, but radios. He looked at mass production and saw something his competitors missed entirely: the future. In April 1928, Sayer M. Ramsdell, Philco's manager of sales promotion, sent letters to prospective dealers describing their new radio as the result of 3 years of research, entirely dry, with no batteries, no eliminators, no acids or liquids of any kind. An obvious about-face from their earlier promotion of electrolytic rectifiers. The company was pivoting, abandoning what had made them successful in order to chase what would make them dominant. To manufacture radios, Philco needed licenses from RCA and Hazeltine Laboratories, holders of most major radio patents. On February 10, 1928, they purchased the William J. Murdoch Company of Massachusetts for $100,000 to obtain the necessary licenses. Then they bought Timmins Radio Products Corporation of Philadelphia, manufacturer of battery eliminators and loudspeakers. With patents secured, Philco's engineers designed a receiver based on the popular Neutrodyne circuit. They added improvements like fully shielded coils, a phonograph jack on the front panel, and a range control condenser. They called it the Neutrodyne Plus. The first Philco radios hit the market in June 1928. The company sold 96,000 units that year, placing them 26th among roughly 800 radio manufacturers in the United States. Not bad for a battery company that had never built a radio before. Dollar sales dropped somewhat to just under $12.5 million, but Skinner felt confident. His goal was to produce a good radio and establish a reputation for quality before attempting to dominate the market. He was playing the long game. Volume became the name of the game. Skinner priced his sets just below the competition, earning the ire of the radio industry and the nickname Price Cutter. He balked at the title, insisting Philco was merely giving the radio buying public more for its money, but the industry understood what he was doing. He was stealing their customers. He was making them look overpriced. He was changing the rules. To accomplish his mass production goals, the company spent $1 million reconditioning its plant, another $1 million installing a conveyor system, and an additional $2.5 million for supplies and materials. The total investment was staggering. Philco went into debt for the first time in its history. 2 Philadelphia banks lent the firm $3 million to make mass production possible. The new assembly line finished in April 1929, but had to be shut down in May due to technical problems. The entire conveyor belt system needed rebuilding. During the 3 months that followed, Philco's accounts receivable rose from $1,600,000 to $5.5 million. Radios were sold to wholesalers on credit, who sold them to dealers on credit. Everyone was waiting for money to come in. By the time production resumed in August, Philco had a 3-month backlog on radio orders thanks to their continuing advertisements. They needed an additional $4 million to meet immediate needs. The $3 million already borrowed was gone. One of Philco's bankers, Carl H. Chafee of Philadelphia's First National Bank, used his influence to arrange a meeting between Philco's executives and Joseph Wayne, Jr., president of the Philadelphia National Bank, the largest banking institution in the city. Wayne was a personal friend of Edward Davis, but remained skeptical, fearing the exuberant stock market might break. Skinner agreed it might, then proceeded to explain at length Philco's methods of production and inventory control, their ever-increasing sales figures, their plan for the future. After hesitation, Wayne agreed to lend Philco the money if Davis, Skinner, and Treasurer John S. Thomas would personally guarantee the loan. The 3 men enthusiastically assigned all of their personal holdings, both inside and outside Philco, to the bank. They bet everything they had on the company's success. None of these men knew for certain what would occur only 2 months later. On October 29, 1929, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression descended on America like a slow-moving storm. But Philco had a secret weapon. Ever since entering the radio manufacturing business, the company had held meetings every Monday morning in a Spartan boardroom with high ceilings, around a large, worn, second-hand table purchased in 1915. Reports from Philco distributors across the country were analyzed, and executives could accurately set production for the next few weeks, avoiding the overproduction that devastated other manufacturers. While competitors built radios that sat unsold in warehouses, Philco matched supply to demand with surgical precision. In 1929, Philco had moved up to 3rd place in the radio industry, behind Majestic and Atwater Kent. They sold over 400,000 radios that year and repaid all bank loans by March 1930. In August 1930, Philco introduced the Baby Grand, also known as Model 20. It was the first cathedral radio offered by any major manufacturer, with an arched top that wrapped from the sides over the top. This design saved money because one piece of wood formed both the top and sides. Priced at $49.50 without tubes, it reached the market 10 months after the stock market crash. It was an instant hit. Philco became the #1 radio manufacturer in the industry. They would remain the top radio maker in America until after World War II. Over 2 million Baby Grand Cathedral radios were sold from 1930 to 1938, more than any other maker sold of this style. The numbers tell the story of dominance. In 1930, the company sold 600,000 radios, grossed $34 million, and achieved the leading position in the country. All of this during a depression when 4.5 million workers, nearly 10% of the entire labor force, were unemployed. By 1934, Philco had captured 30% of the domestic radio market. They had outlasted and outfought literally hundreds of other firms in radio competition, earning a reputation as the hard-hitting, price-slashing wild man of the radio industry. In 1932, when unemployment hit its all-time high of 25%, Philco still sold 600,000 sets, about 2/3 of the previous year's total. Dollar volume was cut in half to 17 million, but they survived when others died. Skinner built his empire on calculated aggression. When Philco purchased the Automobile Radio Corporation, they acquired elegant office furniture along with the company. Skinner refused to allow it into Philco offices. He was quoted in Fortune magazine saying that this is a factory and that Philco does not believe in fancy furnishings. He ate his lunches at the company cafeteria alongside workers. When presented with a choice of 2 slices of ice cream for 20 cents or 3 for 25, he took the 3 slices. He nearly always carried a pipe in his mouth, usually unlit. He had a photographic memory, but often conferred with statistics kept in his briefcase to be sure his memory was correct. In 1935, Fortune wrote that Skinner resembled Rudyard Kipling's wild cat that walks by its wild lone. His competitors resented his solitary attitude. When other radio manufacturers met and agreed not to pursue high-fidelity reception until 1935, Skinner, who had not taken part in the meeting, had Philco bring out its own high-fidelity receiver in June 1934. The company expanded its product line relentlessly. They began marketing car radios in 1930 after purchasing the Automobile Radio Corporation and its Transitone brand. They pioneered many car radio developments: the first telescopic rod antenna in 1934, push-button permeability tuning in 1941, the first commercial use of miniature tubes and search-tune radios in 1948, and the first all-transistor commercially produced auto radio in 1954. In 1934, they secured an exclusive contract with Ford Motor Company to produce all of Ford's audio components, a relationship that would continue for decades. Air conditioners came in 1938, refrigerators in 1939, after purchasing Fairbanks Morse's entire refrigerator division. Home freezers followed in 1946, consumer televisions in 1947, electric ranges in 1949, and home laundry washers and dryers in 1954. Philco was also a pioneer in television broadcasting. They launched experimental station W3XE from Philadelphia in 1932, one of the first all-electronic television stations operated in the United States. While the rest of the country remained oblivious to the new medium, viewers in Philadelphia, New York, and Schenectady bought several thousand sets to watch the limited schedule of programs transmitted by East Coast pioneers. By 1937, Philco was using an experimental 441-line television system with a 12-inch receiver, a direct competitor to David Sarnoff's RCA. In 1941, the station became the third commercially licensed TV operation in the United States as WPTZ. Philo Farnsworth, credited with inventing the first fully functional all-electronic television system, worked at Philco from 1931 to 1933. The company assembled brilliant engineers who pushed the boundaries of what electronics could achieve. But something shifted in 1939. James M. Skinner, who had been president of Philco since late 1930, was made chairman of the board, replacing Edward Davis. Larry E. Gubb, previously head of the Philco Radio and Television Corporation's subsidiary, became president. Skinner had exercised considerable influence over Philco for many years, but apparently his influence was not what it used to be after becoming board chairman. At this time, Philco remained a privately held corporation. The executives still owned the stock. John Ballantyne, James T. Buckley, and Gubb were apparently in favor of offering stock to the public. Skinner's feelings about offering stock had been made public years before in a Fortune magazine article. He was against the idea then, and presumably still was in 1939. He was also Philco's largest stockholder. Before 1939 ended, Skinner resigned from Philco. In 1958, 5 years after his death, Business Week would report that Skinner's departure was due to a policy tiff. The possibility of making Philco a publicly held corporation may well have been the cause. The man who built the empire walked away from it. Philco went public in 1940. November 21, 1937, marked a milestone. Philco produced its 10 millionth radio, a Model 38-116XX. By 1954, the company had led the radio industry in sales volume for 24 consecutive years, selling over 30 million radios total. But leadership in radio sales masked deeper problems. After World War II, RCA was first to bring out a line of television sets, while Philco concentrated on radios and home appliances. RCA became the leader in consumer electronics. Philco invested enormous amounts of time, money, and effort into expanding its product line, adding ranges and freezers. They pursued military electronics and conducted extensive research on transistors and computers. They developed the surface barrier transistor in 1953, the first high-frequency transistor that enabled development of high-speed computers. The Philco Transac models S, 1000 and S, 2000 were the first commercially produced large-scale all-transistor computers, introduced in 1957. All of this activity was a drain on Philco's profits, causing the company to go into a downward spiral in the 1950s. They were trying to be everything to everyone. They manufactured televisions, radios, refrigerators, washers, dryers, air conditioners, stoves, phonographs, computers, military electronics, and satellites. They built the Courier Communications satellite. They contributed components for the Discoverer and Midas satellites. But spreading so thin meant mastering nothing. The Philco Predicta television set was introduced in 1957 for the 1958 model year. It was a black and white television with the picture tube mounted in a unique steerable pod on a pedestal, available in 17-inch or 21-inch picture tubes, wood or metal cabinets, table or floor-standing versions. The design was revolutionary, perhaps too revolutionary. Its specially designed high-deflection angle picture tube, created to achieve a shallow front-to-back depth, turned out to be unreliable. The company faced massive repair costs and reputation damage. What was supposed to be a breakthrough became a catastrophe. Earnings plummeted from $335 million in 1950 to $2.3 million foreign in 1960. In 1961's first half, Philco lost $4,400,000 on sales of $196 million. The development costs of new computers and the lagging consumer demand for home appliances combined to create financial crisis. Seeking opportunities to acquire a technically competent company at a discount, Ford Motor Company began negotiations. James M. Skinner, Jr. had climbed through the ranks at Philco after his father's departure. He attended his father's alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania, graduating from Penn's Wharton School of Business in 1936. He joined Philco at a young age, starting as a factory expeditor, rising to sales manager for accessories, heading the Philco Radio Radar Electronics School during World War II, then becoming sales vice president for refrigerators. By 1956, he was company vice president and head of Philco's television division. The board made him president in the hopes that he could do for the company what his father had done many years before. Skinner Jr. tried to institute reforms, but it was too late. Philco was sinking fast. On December 11, 1961, Ford Motor Company purchased Philco for approximately $90 million in stock. The Philco name survived for a time as Philco Ford. Looking to expand beyond automobiles, Ford was intrigued by access to technologies engineered by Philco. The company's effort to miniaturize and perfect transistors had led to work with the military and NASA. In 1963, Philco Ford won a major contract against tech giants like IBM, RCA, Lockheed, Hughes Aircraft, and AT&T to implement the Mission Control Center at NASA's Manned Space Center in Houston. They designed, manufactured, installed, and serviced all the consoles used in both mission operations control rooms. The consoles were used for the Gemini, Apollo, Skylab, and Space Shuttle missions until 1998. The company that once put radios in American living rooms helped put Americans on the moon, the Apollo 8. Mission featured the first spacecraft to orbit the moon and return to Earth. Mission Control faced serious challenges because signals and data would be lost as the craft went behind the moon. There were concerns about reacquiring the signal, but the Philco Ford equipment worked flawlessly, even allowing astronauts to make broadcasts from space, including a message of peace on Christmas Eve, 1968. In July 1969, Apollo 11 was the focus of the world. As the globe held its breath on July 20th, the descent of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to the moon's surface was monitored through Philco Ford consoles. The Philco-designed consoles in Mission Control 2 at Johnson Space Center have been preserved and restored to their Apollo-era configuration. The control room is listed in the National Register of Historic Places. But consumer electronics was dying. Console stereo systems reached their zenith during 1966 and 1967, with high-quality cabinet construction and powerful stereo chassis systems. Philco had at one time been one of the largest furniture producers in the world, but the end was near for high-quality furniture cabinets. Solid wood cabinets with veneers were replaced with cheaper wood composites covered in vinyl paper and plastic pieces. Quality electronic systems built in the United States were replaced with new designs engineered and built at a plant owned by Philco Taiwan. In 1964, employees went on strike over forestalled contract negotiations between Ford Motor Company and the International Union of Electrical Radio and Machine Workers. The strike lasted 49 days, with over 4,200 employees picketing. By January 1974, Ford was eager to rid itself of home products in Philco's lines. Negotiations with appliance maker White Consolidated Industries started in January but were called off in March. By September, Ford and GTE Sylvania announced the sale of non-automotive parts of the business. The deal closed on December 11th, exactly 13 years after Ford had purchased Philco. In 1977, GTE sold Philco International to White Consolidated Industries. In 1981, Philips acquired the company and trademark. The name Philco bounced between owners like a forgotten heirloom nobody wanted to keep. For a few years, Philco could be found in Kmart stores on value-priced televisions, boomboxes, and clock radios. More recently, the trademark appeared on nostalgia-thumbed record players marketed under license from Philips. The name that once meant innovation and quality became a badge slapped on cheap imports. The Philadelphia factories met their own end. Philco headquarters, also known as Plant 2, faced Tioga Street. You could tell the building had been added onto and enlarged several times over the years. One can imagine Jim Skinner saying that there was no need to build a new plant when that building was perfectly sound. In early 1998, Plant 2 looked dilapidated. By 2000, Plant 2 was gone, and the lot had become a junkyard. 2002, the lot was mostly clear, but remained fenced in. The radio phonograph factory, built in 1945 on the southwest corner of Ontario and C Streets, was torn down around the same time. Building 14, part of the cabinet manufacturing operation, where workers made cabinets for radios, is the last remnant of the once sprawling complex. James M. Skinner died in 1953, 14 years after leaving Philco. His widow, Florence Sayre Skinner, endowed a chair in the sciences at Penn in his name in 1957. That same year, construction commenced on a new building at Penn named after Skinner to host the school's faculty club. Ironically, just as Skinner himself has been forgotten, James M. Skinner Hall was renovated in 2001 and renamed for Charles Addams, the cartoonist who created the Addams Family characters. The man who built America's radio empire does not even have a building bearing his name at his alma mater. His son, James M. Skinner, Jr., served as a trustee of Penn after Philco, until he died. Suddenly, in 1971, neither father nor son has been inducted into the Consumer Electronics Hall of Fame. Powell Crosley, A. Atwater Kent, Commander McDonald, and General Sarnoff are all well known in the antique radio community. All four have been inducted. Skinner remains shut out. The man who beat them all for a decade straight, who built the largest radio manufacturer in the world, who sold 30 million radios across 24 consecutive years of dominance, has become a virtual unknown. The Philadelphia neighborhood of Kensington was once the original hub of working-class Philadelphia, with native and immigrant workers living close to their work sites. Early 19th century industry in the area was diverse. Glass factories and potteries, wagon and machine works, chemical factories. For miles in every direction, one could see the smoke of thousands of mills and factories. Philadelphia was called the workshop of the world for its extensive and varied industrial sector. The city reached its largest number of manufacturing jobs in 1920. The region's deindustrialization after 1920 corresponded to national trends. City firms moving to suburbs helped sustain manufacturing jobs in the wider region temporarily, but the direction was clear. The multi-story factory became obsolete shortly after it opened in many cases. Companies relocated to more modern, continuous-flow, one-story facilities. The pattern repeated across the region: expansion, consolidation, closure, demolition. When Philco entered the radio business in 1928, they joined a crowded field. 800 radio manufacturers competed for American ears. The industry was chaotic, with companies appearing and disappearing almost monthly. Some built quality products and failed anyway. Others built junk and prospered briefly before collapsing. The survivors were those who understood that mass production required mass distribution, that price competition required cost control, that marketing required consistency. Skinner understood all of these things intuitively. The competitive landscape of 1930 included names that have been largely forgotten. Majestic, produced by Grigsby Grunoff Company of Chicago, had challenged Atwater Kent for industry leadership before Philco arrived. By 1930, Majestic was already in trouble. By 1933, the company was in receivership. Grigsby Grunoff collapsed under the weight of the Depression, unable to match Philco's combination of quality, price, and distribution. Atwater Kent, the Philadelphia competitor, had been the leading radio seller. Arthur Atwater Kent decided to quit the radio business entirely in 1935. He closed down operations within a year. By 1936, Philco took over the Atwater Kent complex. The story of Atwater Kent illustrates what Philco avoided. Kent had positioned his radios as premium products, emphasizing craftsmanship and quality over price. When the Depression crushed consumer spending, customers who still wanted radios chose the cheaper Philco models. Kent could not or would not match Philco's prices. He walked away from the industry rather than compete on terms he found distasteful. Skinner had no such qualms. Zenith Radio Corporation presents a different comparison. Eugene F. McDonald Jr., known as Commander McDonald, built Zenith into a quality brand that survived long after Philco faded. McDonald understood that competing on price alone was a race to the bottom. He positioned Zenith as the quality alternative, the choice for customers who wanted the best regardless of cost. This strategy worked because Zenith never tried to be all things to all people. They made radios, then televisions, and they made them well. They did not expand into refrigerators and washing machines and computers. They stayed focused. Zenith survived as an independent company until 1999. RCA Victor represents yet another path. David Sarnoff built RCA into the dominant force in American electronics by controlling patents and standards. RCA did not just manufacture radios and televisions. RCA controlled the licenses that other manufacturers needed to build radios and televisions. Every Philco radio required an RCA license. Every competitor paid tribute to RCA through patent royalties. Sarnoff understood that controlling the infrastructure of an industry was more valuable than manufacturing products within that industry. In 1939, Philco won a lawsuit against RCA, forcing RCA to return $750,000 in excess royalties. It was a significant victory, but it did not change the fundamental power dynamic. The radio technology that Philco manufactured evolved continuously throughout the company's history. The first Philco radios used the Neutrodyne circuit. The superheterodyne circuit, developed by Edwin Armstrong and licensed by RCA, became the standard by the early 1930s. Philco acquired a license for RCA superheterodyne technology in late 1930. Tone control was added in 1930 and 1931, offering 4 settings labeled brilliant, bright, mellow, and deep. High fidelity became a marketing term in 1934 when Philco introduced the model 200-X. The mystery control radio of 1938 and 1939 represented Philco's attempt to innovate in user interface. Model 39-116 featured wireless remote control, allowing listeners to change stations without leaving their chairs. This was remarkable technology for its time, predating television remote controls by decades. World War II interrupted civilian production, but opened new markets for military electronics. Philco converted its factories to war production, manufacturing radio equipment, radar components, and electronic systems for the armed forces. The company's radio manufacturer's service operation trained thousands of men in electronics for the military under the direction of Henry T. Paste Jr. The technical expertise developed during wartime positioned Philco for the post-war electronics boom. The question was whether companies' leadership would use that expertise wisely. The post-war period brought both opportunity and challenge. Consumer demand exploded as returning soldiers started families and moved to new suburban homes. Philco's first consumer television set, the 1948 table Model 48-1000, had a 10-inch black and white screen and sold for $395, equivalent to over $4,000 today. 1 million Philco television sets had been sold by 1953, but RCA moved faster. David Sarnoff had bet the company on television, investing heavily in NBC programming and RCA television manufacturing. While Philco built radios and appliances and tried to do everything, RCA focused on television and won. The transistor changed everything again. Philco engineers developed the surface barrier transistor in 1953. The Philco Transact computers, the first commercially produced large-scale all-transistor machines, introduced in 1957, represented a genuine technological breakthrough. The company was positioned to compete with IBM in the emerging computer industry. That opportunity was squandered through overextension and underfunding, but the technological achievement was real. The question of what killed Philco has multiple answers depending on perspective. From a financial perspective, the company spread its resources too thin across too many product lines. From a competitive perspective, focused rivals like RCA and Zenith outmaneuvered a diversified Philco. From a leadership perspective, the departure of James Skinner removed the individual most responsible for Philco's success without replacing his capabilities. From a market perspective, consumers increasingly valued brand specialization over one-stop shopping for electronics and appliances. From a labor perspective, unionized Philadelphia workers cost more than workers in other regions or countries. The timing of Skinner's departure in 1939 haunts the company's history. Had he remained, would he have focused Philco more sharply? Would he have resisted the diversification that drained resources from core businesses? Would he have matched RCA's television push with equal aggression? These questions cannot be answered, but they can be posed. Skinner built Philco from nothing to dominance in a decade. Without him, the company declined from dominance to dependence over 2 decades. Correlation is not causation, but the pattern is suggestive. The Consumer Electronics Hall of Fame that excludes James Skinner includes his rivals, David Sarnoff, Eugene McDonald, Powell Crosley, Arthur Atwater Kent. Each of these men built significant companies, but none of them dominated the radio industry as completely as Skinner did during the 1930s. Philco's 30% market share, achieved during the worst economic catastrophe in American history, represents an accomplishment that none of his rivals matched. The exclusion from the Hall of Fame reflects the industry's resentment of Skinner's price-cutting tactics, more than an objective assessment of his contributions. The antique radio collector community keeps Philco's memory alive. Specialists restore Model 90 cathedral radios, replacing capacitors and tubes, refinishing cabinets, aligning circuits. Forums discuss the correct intermediate frequencies, the evolution of various model numbers. Collectors seek out rare models, the mystery control sets, the high-fidelity consoles, the Predicta televisions that failed commercially but succeeded aesthetically. These enthusiasts understand what Philco once meant. They preserve the physical evidence of a manufacturing empire that mainstream history has largely forgotten. The Philco Radio Historical Society maintains the most comprehensive online resource about the company's history. Ron Ramirez, the Society's historian, has spent over 20 years researching Philco, making trips to Philadelphia to photograph factory sites and gather documentation. Without such dedicated efforts, the story of Philco would be even more fragmentary than it already is. The cathedral radio design that Philco popularized became iconic. The arch-top wrapping from sides over top was economical because one piece of wood formed both surfaces. But the shape was also beautiful, suggesting church windows or Gothic architecture. The baby grand and its variants became the visual representation of radio in American memory. When illustrators need to suggest the 1930s, they often draw a cathedral radio. Philadelphia's industrial history extends far beyond Philco. but Philco exemplifies the city's manufacturing trajectory. The Workshop of the World label applied to a city where surveys showed firms active in nearly 90% of the 300 industrial categories tracked by the U.S. Census. Into this diverse manufacturing ecology came the radio industry, and Philco became its Philadelphia champion. The satellite technology that emerged from Philco's research continues to orbit the Earth. Ford Aerospace, the descendant of Philco's aerospace division, had built more than half the communication satellites in orbit by the early 1980s. These satellites enable global communications, broadcast television to remote locations, track weather patterns, and support military operations. The surface barrier transistor that Philco engineers developed contributed to the miniaturization that made such satellites possible. The company's technological contributions outlived the company itself. The contemporary connection to Philco's story runs through the broader decline of American manufacturing. The neighborhood that housed Philco's factories has struggled with the same challenges facing deindustrialized areas across the country: unemployment, poverty, crime, population loss, and the search for new economic purpose. Kensington today faces an opioid crisis that has devastated communities throughout post-industrial America. The factories that once provided employment and economic stability are gone. Consider the assembly line that James Skinner built in 1929, $1 million to recondition the plant, another $1 million to install the conveyor system, $2.5 million for supplies and materials, $4.5 million in total, borrowed from Philadelphia banks, personally guaranteed by Skinner and his fellow executives. They bet their personal fortunes on the idea that radios could be mass-produced like automobiles. The assembly line finished in April 1929, shut down in May due to technical problems, and restarted in August. During those 3 months, accounts receivable rose from $1.6 million to $5.5 million as the company sold radios it could not yet produce. The pressure was immense. The execution was flawless. By March 1930, all bank loans had been repaid. The gamble had worked. That assembly line represents something that American manufacturing has largely lost: the willingness to bet everything on a vision of the future. Skinner did not know that his assembly line would work. He did not know that the stock market would crash 2 months after production resumed. He did not know that his company would survive the depression while competitors failed. He knew only that mass production was the future, that affordable radios would create a larger market than expensive radios could ever serve, that the working class wanted to hear voices from far away just as much as the wealthy did. He bet on that vision. He won. The Monday morning meetings at Philco deserve their own commemoration. Every week, executives gathered around the worn secondhand table purchased in 1915 to analyze reports from distributors across the country. They set production for the following weeks based on actual demand rather than optimistic forecasts. This discipline protected Philco's dealers and distributors during the Depression. Competitors built radios that sat unsold in warehouses. Philco matched supply to demand with precision that rivals could not achieve. The demolition sequence of Philco's factories tells its own story. Plant 2 was being razed in early 1998. By 2000, it was gone, replaced by a junkyard. The radio phonograph factory was torn down around the same time. By 2002, the lots were mostly clear, fenced in, but empty. Urban explorers documented what remained, photographing the decay of American industrial might. The workers who built Philco radios numbered approximately 5,000 by 1929, when the assembly line conversion was complete. The 1964 strike involved over 4,200 workers, suggesting employment levels had not dramatically changed over 3.5 decades despite automation. These workers assembled chassis, wound coils, built cabinets, tested speakers, packed shipments. Their skills were specific to the radio industry. When Philco declined, they had to find new applications for what they knew or learn entirely new trades. The transition from manufacturing to service employment affected Philadelphia workers as it affected workers throughout the industrial Midwest and Northeast. Factory jobs that had paid middle-class wages disappeared. Service jobs that replaced them often paid less and offered fewer benefits. Unions that had provided collective bargaining power lost members as factories closed. Communities that had been built around manufacturing employment struggled to find new economic foundations. The consoles that Philco Ford built for NASA's Mission Control Center stand in stark contrast to the demolished factories. These consoles have been preserved, restored to their Apollo-era configuration, and listed on the National Register of Historic Places. They represent the pinnacle of American technological achievement, the equipment that monitored humans traveling to the moon and back. The same company that put cathedral radios in Depression-era living rooms put mission controllers in NASA's control room. The arc from battery manufacturing to space exploration spans 7 decades of American industrial capability. The story of Philco is the story of American manufacturing itself, a battery company pivoting to socket power units, pivoting to radios, pivoting to televisions and appliances and computers and satellites. Each pivot successful until the last one, when the company pivoted into too many directions at once and lost its center. James Skinner understood that radio was not a luxury, but a utility. He made it affordable through mass production. His successors tried to make everything affordable and made nothing well enough to survive. RCA focused on television and won. Zenith focused on quality and survived. Philco tried to be all things and became nothing. The physical architecture of Philco's factories reflected the company's evolution. Plant 1, the old battery factory at Ontario and Arbor Streets, eventually stood empty as production moved elsewhere. Plant 2, the headquarters building, facing Tioga Street, grew through multiple additions over the years. The television factory, built in 1952, represented the company's expansion into new products. Each building represented a phase of Philco's growth. Each building eventually faced demolition. The Philco trademark that now appears on nostalgia-themed record players carries echoes of this history. Consumers who purchase these products rarely know what Philco once represented. They see a retro brand name attached to a retro-style product. They do not see the assembly lines, the Monday meetings, the bank loans personally guaranteed, the 30 million radios, the mission control consoles. The brand has been separated from its meaning. The restoration process itself preserves knowledge as well as equipment. Rebuilding a Philco cathedral radio requires understanding period construction techniques, component specifications, and alignment procedures. The rubber-covered wiring used in 1939 to 1942 models deteriorates and must be replaced. The electrolytic condensers fail and must be restuffed or substituted. Each restoration project transfers knowledge from documentation and experience to the next generation of enthusiasts. The value of restored Philco radios has fluctuated over decades, but generally increased as supply dwindled and demand stabilized. A Model 90 Cathedral, in excellent restored condition, commands prices that would have seemed absurd to Depression-era buyers who paid $49.50 new. The objects that were once mass-produced commodities have become collectible antiques. What was common becomes precious through time and attrition. Philadelphia today bears traces of its industrial heritage that visitors might miss without guidance. Museums preserve equipment and documentation. Historic districts protect architecture that reflects industrial prosperity. But the factories themselves are mostly gone, converted to other uses, or demolished entirely. The physical infrastructure of industry has been repurposed for post-industrial activities. Walk the streets of Kensington today, and you will find no monument to Philco. No plaque marks the spot where the factories stood. No museum preserves the assembly lines. The collectors keep the faith. The restorers preserve the radios. The historians piece together the story from fragments. Yet the underlying principle remains vital. Skinner believed that communication technology should be affordable to everyone, not just the wealthy. He applied assembly line techniques to achieve cost reductions that made radio ownership possible for working-class families. His competitors thought of radio as a luxury. Skinner thought of radio as a utility. He was right. The smartphone in every pocket descends directly from that insight. The streaming service on every television inherits from that vision. Universal access to information and entertainment, once a radical idea, has become a baseline expectation because people like James Skinner proved it was possible. James Mortimer Skinner, born February 9, 1889, died 1953. University of Pennsylvania graduate, 1911. Vice President and General Manager of Philadelphia Storage Battery Company by 1919, creator of the Philco trademark, President of Philco Corporation from 1930 to 1939, builder of the world's largest radio manufacturing company, seller of 30 million radios, forgotten by history, erased from his own building, shut out of the Hall of Fame that celebrates his rivals. Somewhere tonight, an old Philco radio sits in a collector's living room. The tubes have been replaced, the capacitors have been rebuilt, the cabinet has been refinished. When the owner turns the dial, static crackles and then voices emerge, stations materializing from the empty air just as they did when Skinner first demonstrated his Neutrodyne Plus circuit in 1928. The technology works, the craftsmanship endures. The company that made it is gone, its founder forgotten, its factories demolished. But the radio plays on, bringing voices through walls, through cities, through the vast darkness of the American night. That is the legacy of Philco. Not the corporate struggles, not the boardroom battles. The legacy is the sound of voices traveling through space to reach American ears. James Skinner made that possible. America has forgotten to thank him, but the radios still play.